The royal family almost took the life of their own newborn prince in a gruesome manner. The kingdom of Kambora celebrated at the sight of the baby prince about to get unalived, because of the prophecy which had been promised to come to pass no matter what, had been stopped by that single act. The prophecy had stated that the most beautiful child in the kingdom will be born, and that this child will destroy the throne in a manner that it will never be recoverable again. Or so everyone believed. Long before the kingdom reached that moment, Kambora had stood above every other land in the region. Its markets stretched for miles, its farms produced harvests that fed neighboring kingdoms, and its warriors guarded roads that merchants crossed without fear. Gold, ivory, salt, and rare cloth flowed into its capital every season. Travelers believed the ancestors themselves watched over Kambora because famine never entered its borders. No invading army had ever conquered its walls, and it was the richest kingdom to ever exist. Then everything changed. The rain stopped arriving on time, the rivers shrank, harvests began to fail. People whispered that the ancestors had turned away from the throne. King Omor continued to rule stubbornly with a heavy hand instead of seeking answers. Taxes doubled, soldiers collected grain from hungry families. Anyone who questioned the palace disappeared before sunrise. Fear slowly replaced loyalty. Only one sorrow remained inside the palace greater than the suffering outside its walls. The king had no child. For nearly 20 years, every sacrifice had failed. Every prayer had gone unanswered. Every healer and priest had left disappointed after explaining to the king that he needed a concubine, and the king refused on several attempts. The royal bloodline stood on the edge of extinction. Then, without warning, the queen conceived. The entire kingdom erupted into celebration. Every shrine received offerings. Every village lit sacred fires. Drums echoed across Kambora for 7 days as people temporarily forgot about their predicament. Some people believed the ancestors had finally forgiven the kingdom, but then prophets began to prophesy that soon a beautiful boy will be born, and only he will single-handedly destroy the throne. And the people thought this would lead to the destruction of the kingdom. The prophecy spread across the kingdom, putting fear into the people. Births were being monitored seriously all across the kingdom. Some killed their sons as soon as they were born because of fear. Months later, the queen entered labor before dawn. The palace gates closed. Royal priests surrounded the birthing chambers. The cries of the newborn finally echoed through the palace. Moments later, horns announced the arrival of an heir. The kingdom celebrated without restraint. The infant prince became the hope of an entire kingdom before he had even opened his eyes properly. He was named Deman. He was beautiful, but nobody dared accuse him of being the most beautiful boy throughout the kingdom, for fear of getting punished by the royal family for trying to get their only son killed. According to ancient custom, every child born into the royal bloodline had to be presented before the ancestors on the 7th day after birth. The oldest oracle in the kingdom will receive the blessing and reveal the child's spiritual destiny. The 7th day came rather quickly. The queen carried the child herself while patiently waiting to hear about her child's destiny. The king stood proudly before the people. The oldest oracle arrived slowly, supported by 2 attendants. She had served 4 generations of kings. Her visions had never failed. Before her fingers touched his forehead, her body froze. The sacred fire surrounding the ceremony burst higher. The prophecy descended upon Kambora. The ancestors had spoken. It was the prince who would one day destroy the royal throne. Not because he desired power, not because he hated his family, but because justice would demand it. The celebration disappeared. Fear replaced joy. The queen clutched the child tightly, begging that nobody touch her dear Deman, as he cried out loud, clutching her jewelry. Prince Deman was scared. He had been an active child, full of joy and happiness, and barely ever cried for the 7 days he had been alive. But it was a different story now. The king remained completely still. His mind was already made up. Prince Deman had to cease to exist before sunrise. Because of his corrupt love for the throne, he could not risk losing it for anyone, including his son.
Please, my lord, give Prince Deman time. At least let him get to the age where he can speak. Maybe if you train him in your ways, he will not go against you,
the queen begged. But all that fell on deaf ears as the king signaled for 2 guards to snatch Deman away from his mother, and right before the crowd, they were made to end the life of the child. The people of Kambora rejoiced at the sight of such a gruesome act because they thought that they were finally free. While the king thought that he was doing what was best for the kingdom, the queen believed that she had lost everything. One of the priests wrapped the child in layers of white clothing, which repeatedly turned red each time he tried to wrap the baby. After wrapping the 13th layer of cloth, which still turned bright red, he walked out into the darkness and passed the northern gate. He entered the Burning Savannah, the place where all regular villagers were banned from. It was a place for only sacred people, pure in heart and spirit. Anyone who was not pure in heart and spirit but dared walk into the Burning Savannah in the past had immediately died. He buried the dead child in the middle of the Burning Savannah as he wept. He was one of the few people who believed that what had happened was too gruesome and should never have happened.
I am sorry, my prince,
he muttered before leaving the Burning Savannah. As he left, the Burning Savannah's heat began to increase. The baby that had been brutally murdered had begun to stitch back together bit by bit, and before long, the child's heartbeat had returned to normal. The Burning Savannah helped in resurrecting the child, but nobody noticed yet. Back at the palace, the queen locked herself inside her chambers. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. She never truly believed her son had died. Her health began to deteriorate as she began to hallucinate. Far away from the palace, another story had already begun. The first light of morning reached the Burning Savannah. Heat rose quickly from the dry earth, just like the previous night. Then, shadows crossed the grass. A group of wandering holy nomads approached with their cattle. They had crossed the savannah every dry season for generations. The oldest woman among them noticed a change in the soil. The group stopped. One nomad carefully scraped the top layer of the soil off, and to their greatest surprise, they saw a baby wrapped in blood-stained clothing, sleeping peacefully.
Could it be that he was abandoned here by a villager?
A young nomad boy, Isu, asked. The oldest nomad looked carefully at the child.
I think he was left here to die, but he defeated death. Why is he wrapped in such clothing? Isn't it too hot for this?
A witty nomad by the name Goni asked. She was the youngest nomad and was still undergoing her spiritual training. Nobody answered her questions, although some of them smiled.
We should take him with us,
Goni added after noticing that nobody was willing to answer her questions. The oldest nomad shook her head.
No, we should return him to the village. He should have a family there.
But they don't want him. If not, they wouldn't have tried taking his life and leaving him out here, Goni said. All the nomads tried to shush her after she said that. They prevented her from speaking further. The oldest nomad, Gaki, did not get angry at what Goni said. After all, she was only 7 years old. And she was smart. Deep down, Gaki knew that this beautiful boy had just cheated death. Since the ancestors had resurrected him through the Burning Savannah, the nomads accepted him. The journey resumed before midday. Days turned into weeks. The child traveled across endless grasslands, learning to be spiritual and holy. He learned the sounds of cattle before he learned words. He grew among people who owned no kingdom, no palace, and no throne. He was named Suva. His royal past disappeared. Back in Kambora, years passed. They had returned to being a rich land, but not as rich as it was before the great shift. The king never spoke of the prince again. The queen continued leaving offerings every new moon, pleading with the gods to have mercy on the gruesome act that had been committed. The prophecy slowly became forbidden knowledge. Children born after that year never heard the full story of what had happened. The royal scribes erased records. Temple walls were repainted. Songs about the prince disappeared. Only a handful of elderly priests still remembered. Time continued moving. King Omor became harsher. Every failed harvest produced heavier taxes. Every rebellion ended with executions. Kambora's little riches did not last for long. Entire villages were emptied for refusing to surrender food. Fear became the law of Kambora. The blessing that once covered the kingdom vanished completely. Chiefs began refusing royal commands. Border tribes declared independence. Bandits attacked merchant caravans. Trade routes collapsed. The richest kingdom in the region slowly became the most feared. The people whispered that the ancestors had not cursed the land. They had cursed the throne. Far beyond Kambora's borders, Suva knew nothing about any of it. He learned to ride horses before most boys could run. He defended livestock from predators. He hunted beside seasoned warriors. He traveled with caravans between distant settlements. Whenever conflict broke out among the nomads, he stood between opposing sides before violence could spread. He was considered one of the cleanest and purest nomads among the others. As he grew older, he realized that animals loved him. Wild horses refused to flee from him. Lions often watched him before quietly walking away instead of attacking like they normally would. Birds gathered overhead, signaling whenever danger approached. The older nomads noticed. They spoke little about it, as their spiritual journey prohibited them from gossiping and jealousy. Suva believed it was luck. The years continued passing. His strength surpassed men twice his age. His skill with the spear became unmatched. His reputation spread across neighboring lands. Merchants requested his protection. Villages welcomed his arrival. Children admired him. Enemies avoided crossing his path. Yet, one question never disappeared. He never knew where he had come from. Whenever he asked, the elders simply pointed toward the endless horizon where the burning savannah met the sky. The truth remained buried beneath an ancient baobab tree. Inside Kambora, the prophecy everyone believed had died 25 years earlier was quietly moving closer to fulfillment. Not from inside the palace, but from beyond the kingdom's borders. The prince they had killed had risen from the dead, and neither he nor the kingdom knew that destiny had already begun, leading him back towards the throne that had tried to erase him before he could even speak. The years passed quietly until one dry season changed everything. It began with a single attack. A royal convoy carrying taxes disappeared before reaching the capital. The soldiers escorting it were found tied to trees, alive but humiliated. Every sack of grain had been returned to the starving villages instead of reaching King Omor's treasury. By sunset, stories had already spread. Someone had challenged Kambora. A week later, another royal convoy vanished. This time, the soldiers never returned. The villagers that had once trembled found bags of grain waiting outside their compounds before dawn. They began taking some of the food to eat before the royal guard suddenly arrived. The guards seized what was left before the villagers could finish eating. Nobody knew who had delivered them. Nobody dared ask. Soon, another story traveled faster than merchants. A masked warrior had defeated 50 royal soldiers who were withholding food from the villagers before disappearing into the forest. The elders called him a blessing. The palace called him a traitor. Within months, oppressed tribes that had spent generations fighting among themselves suddenly stopped their endless feuds. Messengers traveled between distant mountains. Forest hunters, river fishermen, desert riders, hill warriors. Every forgotten tribe received the same invitation. One after another, they answered. Meetings were held beneath sacred trees. Old grudges ended. Blood feuds were buried. Broken alliances were restored. A single army slowly emerged from people who had once hated one another. No king led them, no chief commanded them. Only one mysterious figure stood above all. The rebel leader, the one who had started the attack on royal guards. Nobody knew where he came from. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody had ever seen his face. He always wore a carved wooden mask covered with white markings. Even his closest commanders had never seen him remove it. People simply called him the Shadow of Justice, and he led the rebels. Civil war finally erupted. King Omar dismissed the uprising as nothing more than bandits. He sent 500 soldiers, only 70 returned. He sent 2,000 more. The rebels defeated them again. The royal armories were emptied. Supply camps disappeared overnight. The rebels seemed to know every royal movement before it happened. Rumors spread across Kambora. Some claimed the Shadow of Justice was blessed by the ancestors. Others believed spirits fought beside them. The king doubled the size of his army. The defeats continued. Royal commanders began refusing important missions. Entire battalions surrendered before battle. The people started whispering something they had not dared whisper for years. Perhaps the throne was finally falling. Far from the war, Suva continued living peacefully among the holy nomads. Conflict meant little to him. He preferred protecting travelers, healing wounded animals, helping children learn horseback riding. Whenever messengers spoke about the growing rebellion, he listened quietly before returning to his work. One afternoon, riders approached the nomad camp. Their horses carried no royal markings. Their clothing belonged to no tribe Suva recognized. The oldest among them stepped forward. "I seek Suva," he said. The young warrior walked forward calmly. The stranger studied him for several moments. "I come from the Shadow of Justice." Silence settled across the camp. The messenger continued. "The rebellion needs warriors who fight for people instead of power." Suva shook his head. "My place is here," he said. "The kingdom is dying and needs your help to eliminate the wicked," the messenger said. "My duty is here," Suva said boldly. "The Shadow believes you can end these wars and conflict," the messenger said, trying to convince Suva. Suva bowed respectfully. "I seek peace, not war." The messenger accepted the answer. Without another word, the riders departed. Life returned to normal. Weeks passed. Then another delegation arrived. Again, they invited Suva. Again, he refused. The elders supported his decision. The nomads had always remained separate from the struggles of kingdoms. They healed. They guided people. They prayed. They did not wage war. The Shadow stopped sending messengers until the king learned something dangerous. Royal spies reported that wandering nomads were secretly feeding rebel scouts. The reports were false, but King Omar never waited for proof. He ordered an entire cavalry division into the Burning Savannah. The soldiers arrived before sunrise. The nomads welcomed them with water. The commander answered by drawing his sword. The first elder was slain before understanding why. The camp erupted into chaos. Soldiers charged through tents. Sacred shrines were burned. Water gods were smashed. Children ran toward the grasslands. Horsemen chased them down. The old men trying to protect them were cut down where they stood. Women carrying infants fled toward the sacred rocks. The young nomads fought back with staffs and hunting spears, but they were overwhelmed. Suva returned from a hunting trip carrying fresh game. Smoke rose above the camp. His footsteps quickened. He dropped everything and ran. Bodies covered the ground. Animals wandered without owners. He found Isu lying beside the broken cattle enclosure, covered in blood. He found Goni near the prayer stones. She had tried protecting 3 frightened children with nothing but a wooden staff. All 4 lay motionless. Tears gathered in Suva's eyes. He searched for any nomad who was still alive. Finally, he reached the center of the camp. There lay Gaiki, the oldest nomad, barely alive. Suva dropped beside her. She struggled to raise one trembling hand.
They feared. People who carry no hatred,
she mumbled before her hand slipped away, before she could utter another word. Suva remained beside her until sunset. He buried every victim with his own hands. Children beside elders, warriors beside healers, teachers beside students. No one remained. When the final grave was covered, Suva planted his spear in the earth. The following morning, the shadow of justice arrived personally. He stood before the fresh graves without speaking. He removed his mask briefly, only long enough to lower his head in respect. Suva noticed the gesture. The rebel leader finally spoke. The king murdered people who never raised weapons against him. Suva stared at the graves. The dead deserve peace. The rebel leader continued. The living deserve protection. Suva remained silent. If good people continue refusing to fight, the rebel leader continued, looking across the endless graves. Only cruel people will rule. Suva slowly pulled his spear from the ground. He looked one final time at the camp that had raised him. Then he walked away beside the rebel leader. After that day onward, Suva entered the rebellion. He tried as much as possible not to harm civilians, even though the rebels did not care who they had to harm to slay officials and royals. At one of the deadliest battles, the shadow died from a fatal spear injury driven too close to his heart. Suva was appointed as the next rebellion leader. His mask was more terrifying than the previous shadows. He fought in wars so well that the entire royal battalions fled after recognizing his banner. He defeated generals twice his age, captured fortresses without slaughter, freed prisoners from royal dungeons, returned stolen harvests to starving farmers. Across Kambora, people began calling him the White Spear. Children sang songs about him. Royal commanders cursed his name. Suva never realized one truth. Every battle he fought, every fortress he captured, every army he defeated, served one purpose. He was unknowingly marching against his own father. Inside the palace, King Omo's anger consumed him. As much as he successfully killed off members of the rebellion, more of his men were dying. Reports of defeat arrived daily. Another fortress lost, another commander captured, another province joined the rebellion. The throne room grew emptier with each passing month. Even loyal chiefs began doubting him as a king. Then, something impossible happened. The oldest oracle returned. People had believed she had died during Prince Deman's naming ceremony. Yet, one afternoon, she walked through the palace gates, unaided. Word spread through the palace before she reached the throne. The king watched silently, waiting for her to speak as she approached his throne. The oracle lifted her staff, then struck it once upon the palace floor. The sound echoed through every chamber. Her voice filled the hall.
The child never died, she said.
Silence swallowed the palace.
The lost prince still lives,
she added. The staff struck the floor again.
The prophecy still breathes.
The king rose so suddenly his throne toppled behind him. The court erupted. Chiefs stared at one another. Priests fell to their knees. Servants abandoned their duties. The prophecy everyone believed had ended years earlier had returned. King Omor refused to accept it. He ordered every royal archive opened, every record from the year of Prince Deman's birth examined, and every newborn recorded during that season investigated. Orphans and abandoned children were not excluded from the search. Messengers rode across the kingdom, carrying sealed orders. Royal soldiers searched villages, mountain settlements, fishing communities, hunter camps. Every wandering tribe, every monastery, every sacred shrine, every group of holy nomads, every priest, every prophet, no one escaped investigation. The king promised unimaginable riches, land, gold, titles. Anyone who revealed the lost prince would be rewarded beyond measure. The king exploded into frantic searching. Old stories resurfaced. Forgotten rumors returned. Families began accusing neighbors. Strangers were watched carefully. Travelers were questioned before entering towns. Fear spread faster than the rebellion itself. Hidden within the palace, the queen heard the oracle's words. Hope returned for the first time in many years. Even though she had seen her son cut into pieces like meat, she had never believed her son truly died. They had called her mad and locked her up in a room because of her claims. But now, she was happy that she truly had not just been a mad woman. As everyone in the palace had claimed, she knew her husband. If the prince truly lived, the king would finish what he started. She could not let that happen again under her watch. Without informing the king, she secretly summoned her most trusted attendants, people who remained loyal only to her. She divided them into small groups. Some traveled disguised as merchants, others dressed as pilgrims. Some joined caravans, others entered monasteries. Several moved among wandering tribes. A few even sought out nomads, priests, and prophets living beyond Kambora's borders. They all carried the same hidden mission: find the lost prince, protect him, reach him before the king's hunters did. Unknown to everyone searching, the prince they sought was no frightened child hiding in some forgotten village. He had already become the white spear that they feared. The rebellion continued growing stronger with every passing month. Villages that had once feared the royal army now welcomed the white spear with songs instead of silence. Chiefs who had once sworn loyalty to King Omor secretly pledged their support to the rebellion. Every victory brought fresh recruits, and every defeat weakened the throne further. Among Suva's closest commanders was a quiet strategist named Kalin. Unlike the other commanders, Kalin spent more time studying people than studying battles. He noticed details others ignored. He remembered old stories. He connected events that seemed unrelated. After the oracle announced that the lost prince still lived, Kalin began paying closer attention to Suva. The timing disturbed him. The prince would have been about Suva's age. Suva had no parents. He had been found as a child by holy nomads near the Burning Savannah. The Burning Savannah happened to be the same place where rumors claimed the royal prince had been taken after his execution. The more Kalin thought about it, the more impossible it became to ignore. One evening, while the army rested beside an ancient shrine, Kalin quietly visited one of the oldest priests living in the surrounding hills. The priest had served Kambora long before King Omor took the throne. Kalin showed him a small white cloth Suva had carried since childhood, believing it was nothing more than a keepsake given to him by the nomads. The old prince's hands began trembling. He carefully unfolded the faded cloth. Hidden beneath rays of dust remained the royal symbol of Kambora. Only members of the royal family were wrapped in that sacred pattern at birth. The priest looked at Kellen with fearful eyes.
The child who carried this cloth belonged to the palace.
Kellen's heart raced. He returned to the rebel camp before dawn. That night, he watched Suva sitting beside the fire, sharpening his spear while laughing with the younger warriors. Nothing about him resembled the cruel king. Nothing about him suggested royalty. He fought with ordinary people. He protected children. He refused unnecessary bloodshed. Kellen realized something terrifying. If the rebellion discovered their beloved commander carried royal blood, many tribes would lose faith in everything they had sacrificed for. Some had lost entire families because of the royal household. Others had spent generations suffering beneath the throne. Many would never accept following a prince. The rebellion could tear itself apart overnight. Kellen made his decision. The truth would remain buried, for now. Far away inside the royal palace, another secret reached King Omo. One exhausted informant arrived after traveling for days without rest. He collapsed at the throne before presenting a sealed message to the king. The king broke the seal, his face hardening as he read its contents. The report contained only a few sentences. The white spear that he had deep hatred for had been found as an infant in the Burning Savannah. It is rumored that the ancestors used the Burning Savannah to raise the child from the dead. He had then been raised by holy nomads. He bore unusual markings connected to the royal family. King Omo dismissed every servant from the throne room. Silence filled the chamber. The child had resurrected from the dead. It was not unheard of for a person to reincarnate in the kingdom of Kambora. But what was unheard of was an instant rebirth. One would have thought that King Omo would be afraid because of such a happening, and rage filled his heart. He remembered the prophecy. Everything the oracle had spoken was becoming reality. His greatest enemy was his own son. King Omo summoned his captain of assassins. 5 figures entered the throne room dressed entirely in black. Each had served the royal family for decades. Each had ended some rebellions before they could begin. King Omo looked at them without emotion. "The white spear must die," he announced. The captain accepted the order. King Omo lowered his head as he whispered that there must be no witnesses when they killed the white spear. The assassins bowed together. Within the hour, they had disappeared into the night. The king remained alone. He walked slowly towards the royal nursery that had remained locked for years. Dust covered every surface. A small wooden cradle still stood untouched. King Omo rested one hand upon it. For a brief moment, guilt crossed his face. Then he disappeared. His fear of the prophecy remained greater than his love for his child. His son had to die again. Several days later, the rebellion established a camp near a rocky valley. Scouts reported no danger. The soldiers relaxed. Some prepared food, others cleaned weapons. Suva spent the evening training younger recruits. Kellen watched the surrounding hills uneasily. Something felt wrong. Before he could warn anyone, an arrow flew through the darkness. It struck one guard in the shoulder. Another arrow followed, then another. The camp exploded into confusion and panic. 5 dark figures descended from the cliffs with impossible speed. They ignored every ordinary soldier. Their blades moved toward one target alone, Suva. The first assassin attacked from behind. Suva sensed the movement. He spun aside. His spear struck the attacker's waist before the blade could reach him. The assassin stumbled. A second charged immediately. Steel met wood. Sparks scattered across the battlefield. Suva pushed him backward before another attacker appeared from the left. The assassins moved with perfect coordination. Each strike created an opening for another. Rebel warriors tried helping. The assassins avoided them completely. Their mission remained unchanged: kill the white spear. Suva fought alone. His spear swept across the ground, forcing 2 assassins backward. A third leapt from above. Suva rolled beneath him before striking upward. The assassin crashed onto the rocks. The remaining attackers surrounded him. For several moments, nobody moved. Then all four attacked together. One assassin fell, then another. The remaining two fought with desperate determination. Suva disarmed one before knocking him unconscious. The captain remained standing. He looked at Suva carefully, almost with pity. Then he reached inside his robe instead of raising his sword. He threw a small bundle towards Suva. The fighting stopped. The bundle landed beside Suva's feet. It was wrapped in faded white cloth. The same pattern decorating the cloth matched the one Suva had carried since childhood. Confusion spread across the camp. The captain smiled weakly.
"You should have remained dead 25 years ago,"
the captain said. "What did you say?" Suva asked in confusion.
"The prince was never meant to live,"
the captain said. Before anyone could question him further, the captain swallowed something hidden beneath his tongue, a poison he had kept in his mouth, meant to end his life if he failed to complete the mission as instructed by the king. Within moments, he collapsed. Silence settled across the valley. Suva slowly picked up the cloth. His hands shook. The royal symbol stared back at him, exactly like the one he had carried since childhood. Callan's face turned pale. He could no longer deny what he already knew. Suva looked through the dead captain's belongings. Inside, a leather pouch lay a sealed royal order. He broke the seal. The message bore King Omor's personal mark. It contained only one command: eliminate the lost prince, Deman, before the prophecy is fulfilled. Suva read the words again. The world around him seemed to disappear. The burning savannah, the strange cloth, the unanswered questions, the oracle's announcement, the king's assassins, everything suddenly connected. The truth he had searched for all his life had finally found him. He was not an orphan. He was not an abandoned child. He was Prince Deman, the son of King Omor, the boy who resurrected, the child the kingdom believed had died 25 years earlier. The commander every royal soldier feared was the very prince they were desperately searching for. That night, Suva sat alone beneath the stars. He stared at the royal cloth resting across his knees. He no longer knew who he truly was. The nomads had raised him. The rebellion had trusted him. The kingdom feared him. And the father he had never known had already tried to have him killed. Twice. The news of the assassins never reached the royal palace. King Omor believed the mission had succeeded. He continued preparing for the final assault against the rebellion, unaware that the son he had tried to erase twice was still alive. Far from the capital, Suva disappeared from the rebel camp for several days. He carried nothing except his spear and the 2 pieces of royal cloth. His thoughts returned to the burning savannah. Every memory of his childhood suddenly felt different. The stories Gaki had told him, the questions she had never answered, the place where he had been found. As he stood in the burning savannah, he felt instant peace. A wave of happiness consumed him. It was as though the burning savannah spoke to him. He felt connected to the place. He believed that truly the burning savannah had saved him. Everything had been leading to this truth. When he finally returned to the camp, someone was already waiting for him. It was an elderly woman, dressed like an ordinary traveler. Her face was hidden beneath a long veil. She stood alone beneath an ancient baobab tree. Suva approached carefully. "You have been looking for me?" he said. The woman slowly lowered her veil. Suva had never seen her before, yet something inside him refused to look away. Tears rolled down her face before she spoke.
"My son."
Suva remained silent. The woman stepped forward but stopped herself before reaching him.
"I have imagined this moment for 25 years,
she said. Sova tightened his grip around his spear. "You are the queen," he simply stated. She nodded. Silence settled between them. The queen reached inside her clothing and removed a tiny bracelet made of polished ivory.
"I made this before you were born,"
she said as she carefully placed it on the ground.
"The priests never allowed me to give it to you."
Sova stared at it without moving. The queen fell to her knees.
"I failed you. I couldn't stop them,"
she said. Her shoulders trembled.
"I begged. I fought. I screamed, but I could not save my own child."
Sova remained motionless. For years, he had imagined meeting the people who abandoned him. He had expected anger, hatred, questions. Instead, he found a broken mother. The queen slowly raised her head.
"I know why you fight. I know what your father has done. I know the throne has brought suffering,"
she said as she wiped her tears.
"But I beg you, do not destroy Kambora in the process. The people are innocent and they have suffered enough."
Sova looked towards the distant horizon, not wanting to say anything. Tears gathered in his eyes. He did not want revenge, and he did not want the throne. The queen hesitated before adding,
"Save your father if you can."
Sova looked at her in disbelief. "The man who ordered my death? The man who murdered thousands? The man who burned villages?" Sova asked angrily. The queen closed her eyes.
"He is still your father."
Sova said nothing. The queen picked up the bracelet and placed it into his hand.
"I am not asking you to love him. I am asking you not to become him."
She turned away. Without another word, she disappeared into the forest with the attendants who had secretly guarded her from a distance. Sova remained beneath the tree until sunset. Her final words refused to leave his mind. Days later, the rebellion surrounded the royal capital. They had planned to raid the capital because they believed that if they wiped out the officials, they would have victory and the kingdom would finally be free of corruption. Thousands of warriors filled the surrounding hills. Royal soldiers stood behind the massive gates. The greatest battle in Kambora's history had finally arrived. The rebel commanders prepared ladders. Archers moved into position. War drums echoed across the valley. Sova stood at the front wearing the mask of the white spear. He looked at the city walls. Beyond them lived thousands of innocent families, children, merchants, farmers, craftsmen. None of them had chosen the king. None of them deserved to die. The attack horn sounded. Before anyone could advance, Sova raised his spear. The entire rebel army stopped. He removed the white spear mask. Every commander stared at him. "No one enters the city," he stated. Confusion spread through the ranks. One commander stepped forward. "The walls must fall." Sova shook his head. "The throne must fall. The people must live. There are other ways to punish the corrupt rather than kill them," he said. Arguments erupted immediately. Several rebel leaders accused him of weakness. Others demanded an immediate assault. Ignoring them, Sova rode alone towards the city gates, carrying no shield. But as the gates opened, armies from both sides advanced at each other without Sova's instruction. A terrified group of villagers suddenly appeared, trapped between the advancing forces. Sova dismounted immediately. He lifted frightened children onto abandoned carts. He guided elderly villagers towards safety. He blocked charging horses. He pulled wounded civilians away from falling debris. The rebels shouted in confusion. The royal soldiers hesitated. Neither side understood his actions. One rebel commander pointed his sword towards Sova. "He has betrayed us!" A royal general shouted from the opposite side. "He protects the rebels!" Within moments, Both armies turned against him. Arrows flew from both directions. Sova moved constantly, shielding civilians instead of himself. Several rebel warriors finally understood his intention. They joined him. Some royal soldiers lowered their weapons after seeing children escape because of him. The battle descended into complete confusion. As the fighting spread across the city outskirts, strange winds swept through the capital. Sacred temple bells rang without human hands touching them. Every warrior stopped. The oldest oracle slowly walked onto the battlefield. Priests followed behind her, carrying the ancient staff of ancestors. The oracle planted the staff into the earth. A bright light spread across the battlefield. Her voice echoed through the silent city.
You have all misunderstood. The prophecy never spoke against Kambora. It never condemned the people. It condemned the throne.
Silence filled the battlefield. She continued.
The ancestors never declared the prince will destroy the kingdom. They declared the prince will destroy the throne.
She went ahead to explain that the throne itself was the source of the corruption, not the villagers. Murmur spread across both armies. Many soldiers slowly lowered their weapons. The rebellion realized they had mistaken vengeance for justice. They had a good motive, but had been driven out of anger. Inside the palace, King Omar refused to believe the revelation. He seized his sword and marched towards the throne hall. Sova entered moments later. Father and son finally stood face to face. Neither raised a weapon immediately. King Omar studied the young man before him. The same eyes, the same face, the same blood. Sova slowly lowered his spear. It never has to end like this. King Omar roared with anger. He attacked. Sova stepped aside. He refused to strike back. The king became more furious. Each missed attack fed his obsession.
You came to steal my throne!
He screamed. He charged once more. In his rage, he pulled a ceremonial chain hanging beside the throne. Ancient mechanisms hidden beneath the palace activated instantly. The old throne hall had been designed generations earlier to protect kings from invaders, but it began to fall apart. Massive stone pillars shifted. The floor cracked. The throne platform began collapsing. Sova leapt forward to help his father, but King Omar pushed his hand away before lunging at Sova one final time, but the broken floor gave way beneath him. The king lost his balance and his head hit the floor so hard that he died instantly. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through vengeance, not through murder, but through a king destroyed by his own obsession with power. News of King Omar's death spread quickly. The surviving nobles approached Sova. The rebel commanders and some royal leaders knelt before him, telling Sova that the throne was rightfully his and he was fit to rule. Sova looked towards the royal crown resting upon a velvet cushion. He carried it towards the great forge used by royal blacksmiths, and without hesitation, he threw the crown into the blazing fire. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. The gold slowly softened, then melted. The symbol of centuries of hereditary rule disappeared forever. Sova turned towards the gathered crowd. He announced that the kingdom will never belong to one bloodline, and nobody will ever have to be afraid of the throne. Rather, the clans and council will rule together. No one argued. Even the surviving nobles lowered their heads. Walkers carried the broken throne from the palace. No one rebuilt it. King Omar's body was cremated. Generations later, children no longer heard stories about a prince cursed to destroy a kingdom. Instead, they heard about the prince who had been condemned before he learned to speak. The child who won over death. The child who survived because strangers chose mercy over fear. The warrior who refused revenge. The leader who fulfilled an ancient prophecy by ending corruption instead of destroying his people.